It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. I am amped up to talk with my guest today. Joining me is Jessica Rhodes. Jessica is the founder and CEO of Interview Connections, what I call a matchmaking service for podcasters and guests. And she's also the host of her own podcast and as well as a TV show, Interview Connections TV. So Jessica, welcome to Accelerate.
Andy, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk about podcasting with you.
Oh, great. Well, that is exactly what we're going to talk about. So maybe preface that by telling us how you got started in this whole podcasting business. You are, as I told you before, you're becoming the queen of podcasts. So
I just got off the phone with somebody that said, you're the queen of podcasting. So it's funny because I started in podcasting really as a behind the scenes person. Didn't start my own show until well over a year after I was working in the business booking interviews. So about 3+ years ago was a virtual assistant. That was my first business, being a virtual assistant for entrepreneurs and small business owners, helping them get booked as a guest on podcasts and then also helping find guests for their show. And as podcasting started to rise in popularity with businesses and entrepreneurs, there was clearly a need for guest booking. For a long time, hosts found their own guests, which a lot of hosts still do, or they just, they're just interviewed when somebody asks them, which maybe is like once a year, or maybe for some people it's like they have so many requests they need to sift through them. But that's where I really saw the need, is that people wanted to get interviewed on shows. They wanted to leverage podcasting and being a host and being a guest to build their business. But there was some, they had a business to run. Podcasting is not something they wanted to do full time, but it was something that they wanted to really leverage. So that's where I came in, is that I saw that guest booking, finding guests and then finding shows to be a guest on it takes a lot of time. It's a huge pain point and a huge time suck for a lot of entrepreneurs. So that's why I created interviewconnections.com to be, as you said, that matchmaking service for podcast hosts and great guest experts.
Okay. So podcasts are hot these days. Everybody's talking about it. There's more than 250,000 podcasts, according to the latest statistics I saw, which is sort of mind-boggling. Yet on the other hand, also I think the statistic is that the average podcaster only puts out 7 episodes before they quit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, which sort of defeats the purpose of it, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
More people are listening to podcasts than ever. So why are they so hot right now? I mean, what is the need they're filling?
I think that for business owners and entrepreneurs specifically, they're really hot because it is building up credibility and the celebrity factor that increases your exposure and your name recognition and your personal brand. When you host your own podcast, you start to grow an audience around what you do. And then people, your followers, your fans, your community, your clients, your prospects, they start looking at you as kind of a celebrity. And the power of celebrity is huge in business. When you position yourself as a celebrity, as the go-to authority, as the leader and the expert in your industry, people will want to work with you and they'll be willing to pay you more for what you offer and what you do. So people are realizing that, wow, if I start my own podcast, I'm the host of my own radio show, I can become a celebrity in my niche, and that will, again, grow my brand, grow my exposure, and ultimately bring more business to my company.
Gosh, when you say it like that, I'm thinking I need my entourage.
Yes.
I mean, I'm a celebrity. I need an entourage.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like to say I'm very famous in very small circles.
Well, yeah, and that's the big thing, though, Andy, is that we can all be very famous in our own circles. Like, I was interviewed, and most of us don't feel famous, right? Like, I heard Chris Brogan, who's a very well-known online marketer, I heard him say once that, when he walks into a social media marketing conference, everyone wants their picture with him. His room is full. His keynote presentation is super popular. But if he were just sitting in a Starbucks in Boston where he lives and he says, everybody look at me, they go, sit down and shut up. Because, he's famous in his circle. We're all famous in our circles. I was on a podcast last week, and after the recording, the host said, I was so nervous talking to you. And I was like, what? Why? And he goes, I have been following you and listening to your podcast.
There you go, right?
He was so nervous, but I wasn't thinking anything of it. So, I have become kind of a celebrity to a lot of people because of having my own podcast.
Well, and I think it's something really interesting to think about. When you think about a podcast, for most businesses, I would advocate for if you're a small, mid-sized business, if you have any sort of content marketing strategy or you have got a blog, you're sharing on social, is you can make the case that actually having a podcast is even easier than writing a blog.
I agree. Writing for me takes so much more time. That's why I actually have somebody on my team that ghostwrites my blog. She obviously takes a lot of the content.
No, don't say that.
Is that against the rules?
No,
I create
kidding.
all my own content. I do videos, I do podcasts, and I've actually written a ton of blog posts. But for me, I got to a point where I couldn't maintain my blog schedule because if it was up to me to actually put figuratively speaking, the pen to the paper, it just wasn't getting done. So I said, I don't want, it's my content, it's my expertise, but I just need somebody to get the words out onto the screen. And it takes a lot longer. And the great thing is specifically about, I work with a lot of podcasters with interview shows. We're talking a lot about, your celebrity and your personal brand, and, name recognition. But having an interview show is such a great way to build relationships with people in your industry, either other potential JV partners or influencers or your potential clients.
Yeah, so let's take a step back. So we talked about before, easier than a blog. Everybody should be blogging, though they're not. But it's something you have to say about your company. As I said, you're an entrepreneur, you're a solopreneur, you're a typical small business, mid-sized business. You don't have a lot of marketing resources, but you need to be getting word out about your product. You need to be developing a position of thought leadership and authority and expertise around what you do so that you can attract the right type of customers, the right type of business at the rates that you want, as you talked about. Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking into a microphone is substantially easier than, as you said, facing the blank screen and deciding what I'm going to write about.
Exactly, because usually when somebody, we all have our different areas of expertise. Andy, you could probably talk for days and days about sales. I could talk for a long time about podcasting and interviews and how to pitch and how to get booked and everything that goes in. We all can talk for hours upon hours about what our expertise is, especially when prompted by a couple questions. If you if you have a solo show, you just write out a couple questions and then just answer those questions and just talk. Mm-hmm. Or being a guest on a podcast. Somebody asks you questions, you answer the questions and you get the content out. And then, of course, having your own show where you're interviewing guests, then that's even easier because you're not even really creating the content. You're having a guest on, you're asking the questions, they're answering them. So it's more of a facilitating a conversation. So it's harder in some ways because there's obviously more production. You want to think about your sound quality and guest coordination. But if talking comes more naturally to you than podcasting, it's definitely easier to just get the content out of your brain.
and it's an easy branding thing because there's a personalized nature about hearing someone speak that doesn't exist when you're reading their words.
Oh, absolutely.
And so this is, if you're thinking how do I take the first steps and to start, building my thought leadership position around what I do in my community, in my marketplace, you put this on your website and people still come to your website and plus you can promote it through your social channels, but it's a little more compelling, especially if you don't feel like you're a great writer. It can become a little more compelling to have this personal connection that people begin to form with your brand and you.
Exactly. Podcast listeners really walk away from podcasts after they listen feeling like they have a relationship with the host because they're spending so much more time with a podcaster by listening to their show than they would if they just read a blog post. If you go to a blog, you're spending maybe 1 to 3 minutes, maybe less or maybe more if it's good
well,
or
you're
bad.
scanning for headlines, first of all.
You're
I mean,
scanning
there's
for
a
headline.
form. There's a form to writing blogs, which we all know. Which you have to have a certain number of. You have to have a good headline. You have to have a certain number of intermediate headlines, section headlines.
Yeah.
Because people scan. So
Yeah,
people can't
people
really
are
scan a
scanning.
podcast.
When I scan a blog, if I don't see the bullet points, I'm like, I'm out of there because I prefer to listen than to read a blog post, unless there's bullet points that I can just scan and get. But I'm just reading the actual content in my own voice, in my own head. But when someone's listening to a podcast, they're actually hearing your voice. They're starting to develop a relationship with you. I have some really great friends online, and I mean, they're in real life too. Had a chance to meet them, but I first
Not fake
met
friends, but
them.
real friends.
They're real friends.
Real friends, okay.
But a lot of them, I first came in contact with them by listening to their podcast. And then, became friends with them on social media, then met them in person at conferences and, have become real friends. But that all starts, a lot of those relationships start with a podcast, by listening to a podcast.
Right. So now this next step is, if you've made the decision that, okay, well, this sounds like something I'm interested in exploring, is, you have to take it as an opportunity to demonstrate your expertise. So you just can't turn on the mic and talk about anything. You have to think about being entertaining. You have to think about being interesting. You have to think about conveying a message and a point of view and perhaps even some knowledge and information, depending on what you're podcasting about.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the hardest part about podcasting, is having that good mix of being entertaining and also providing information for your target market. So I think there's a couple things. You have to think through, who is your target market, and for most business owners, I would say, who's your ideal client? You most likely want to attract listeners who would potentially be clients or customers in your business. So think about, who do you tend to work with? Who do you tend to serve? And create a show that's great for that kind of person. And at Interview Connections, we work with obviously a lot of interview-based shows. So, having guests on your podcast to, guests that you can interview, who either bring complementary areas of expertise or topics that are also valuable to your listeners and your target market. Or what's really great is bringing on guests who are your prospects or are people that you want to connect with, and that maybe just saying, hey, will you go have a cup of coffee with me and just let's talk for 30 minutes? When someone says, hey, do you just want to, let's just talk for 30 minutes? If I don't really know them, I might say, I don't know. I'm really busy. Is this going somewhere? But if someone says, will you come on my podcast? I'd like to interview you and showcase you. You're right there having a conversation with them, but it's benefiting both of you because it's going out to your audience, and it's also a way for them to get exposure for themselves.
Exactly. So yeah, you have to be very conscious. You said the targeting who you want, who's your ideal listener, right? You talk about ideal client profile. That's really who your ideal listener is.
Right.
And your content has to be focused and structured around to help them. And people have to keep in mind is that the people listening to this is that in sales today, the first line of differentiation between you and your competition is you. It's a person. It's not a product. It's not a feature. It's you, the person. It's that connection you make with the prospective buyer as they form the perception of you as a prospective business partner. So podcasts really help facilitate that first level of personal connection, especially if you're speaking about something you're familiar with, you're passionate about, something you have some expertise in.
Yeah.
Then they really help create that perception and perhaps even become a buyer.
I really want to emphasize, Andy, something that you said regarding, having your personality out there. Let's just say you're a digital marketing agency. If you look at, there's probably millions of them out there. If you pull up two websites, two different digital marketing agencies, okay, this is what we do, these are our prices, and, we're the best at this and we're the best at this. And they both kind of look similar. But if one of those sites or if one of those businesses has their founder and CEO kind of front and center, you can hear them on a podcast, I am much more drawn to an agency or a service provider if I feel like I know and I'm drawn to the founder, the leader of the company. Mm-hmm. If it's, otherwise I'm just kind of price shopping and hoping that that your team is doing a good job. So I think it's super important that, if you've got a company and a business, if you are out there as the founder and CEO, building up an audience and positioning your personal brand out there, people will be drawn to you because they're going to hear you and say, I liked you. You were funny. You've got good information. I want to work with you. What do you do? How can I work with you?
Yeah. And I can speak from experience of guests that are on my show, on this show, that have said on many occasions I had people do business with me as a result of hearing me on the show. They had been on my mail list or they'd been on my prospect list and they hadn't done business with me yet. But when they heard the interview, that's what tipped the balance in their favor.
Exactly. I've got so many examples and stories of clients of ours who say, I had a guest on my show, or I was a guest on somebody's podcast, and at the end of the call, they asked me how they could engage with my services. They asked me how they could, how I could help them, or, vice versa. And so it just shows that when you get a client, most likely, the easiest sale to make is somebody that, is either a referral or a current customer, meaning like it's somebody that you have a relationship with, somebody that's already feels like they know you a little bit. So cold calls are really hard. And so if you do podcast interviews, you're kind of warming up the conversation a little bit. You're warming up that sales call.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's exactly what happens. So really let's talk about sort of the steps to creating a show. So I'm sure we've convinced people the absolute value in having one in their business is the next, really sort of demystify and I'll make up a word here, decomplexify the process, because it's, as someone who's gone through it myself, it's really not that hard.
It's really not that hard, Andy. You're right. But it seems really hard because there's a lot of stuff to do on the front end. Okay, we got to figure out what the podcast artwork is. We got to figure out the name, the tagline.
Well, let's go through that. So first you have messaging. What are you trying to say? And who are you targeting, right? Who is that buyer persona? We'll use the marketing term, or avatar, as people sometimes interchange with. Who is that person that you're targeting, and what are you trying to say to them? That's the first step. And if you're in business and you're looking at this as a sales tool, then that should become fairly clear if you've done that for your own business as well, right? If you're already selling product, you should know who your ideal client profile is, and this shouldn't be a mystery.
Yeah, and if you have a brand already, or a tagline or something already in your business, I would say keep your podcast aligned with that brand. So you don't have to create a whole new brand messaging tagline from scratch. Our someone that we both mastermind with, Michelle, she has a program called Body Wisdom. So we're all saying that's what your podcast should be called, Body Wisdom.
Right.
So keeping it kind of aligned. Lindsay Anderson, she's got trafficandleads.com. She has the Traffic and Leads podcast. So, you don't have to, people really, really overthink the name of the show and the tagline. Well, here's a secret nobody talks about. You can always change the name later on if you're realizing it totally doesn't work.
Right.
So you can change the tagline, you can change the name. I've adjusted my artwork at least 3 times over the past, year and a half as my brand has evolved, and that's okay.
Yeah, and that's an important point. Is this isn't a static thing. This is something you start. It's just like look and feel of your website or your blog or any of your branding material. This is part of that.
Yeah.
All right, so you got your messaging. Now you have to sort of think, okay, what's the format I want to use? Am I going to just talk for 10 minutes, my opinion, write down, as you said, 2 questions I'll answer that come up frequently? Or are you going to do an interview? Or maybe even increasingly a little more expensive option is a story format.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of different formats. So I think deciding, I think in an ideal world, we would all have these amazing like narrative-based story shows, but those take a lot of time. So I think it's important to say, okay, we can decide what your format is based on what is your goal with the show. Like I know people that have an interview-based show, and those interviews are purely so they can have an opportunity to be interviewing and conversing with targeted prospects.
Sure.
So, it's just an interview show. I'm moving into more, I've just started recording and haven't even released yet, episodes that are a teaching format where I'm also including like 5-minute little chats with other people, but I'm doing more of a teaching format. But I have done the whole show so far has been interviews. a lot of my guests are clients of mine because it helps me strengthen my relationship with my clients who I don't always work directly with. So thinking about what is the goal of the show is if it's just a solo show, like we have somebody that we both know also is a grief coach. So what my recommendation is, that is not probably the best place for an interview show. People that are currently grieving might not want to go spotlight their story currently.
Lots of tears.
But a meditation podcast or, a solo 10 minutes of like, listen to this in the morning when you're having a tough time. So depending on what your business is and what your goal is for the show will determine what the format is. And again, you can kind of change that. And then also determining what the frequency is. How often are you going to be releasing episodes? It's going to be daily, 5 days a week, 3 days a week, weekly. Hey, it could be, just twice per month, but it just has to be something that you can pretty much maintain. Because if 1 month you're like, I'm going to do 5 episodes a week this month, and then the next month you're slammed and you only do 1 episode a week, well, you're confusing your audience and they don't know what to expect from you. So figuring out what the consistency is and just trying to stick with that as much as possible so you develop an audience that knows how they can rely on you.
Well, and this is something that's stressed a lot in podcasting because, you think about it from a TV and radio perspective. We build an audience and people expect to have shows on at a certain time. But this is really the same is true when you blog or you do your social media is people, if you're building an audience with followers, they expect consistency.
Yes,
and
they
if you
do.
don't have consistency, then you lose the audience. And so you may say, well, yeah, we'd like to do this weekly. Well, look at what you're doing with your blog. Look at what you're doing with other things that you're using to build your content platform. And are you being consistent with it? Because you really need to have this commitment to doing this on a consistent basis. And maybe this is the key that gets you to be consistent in your other platforms as well. But consistency is really the key.
Definitely.
All right, so budget.
Yes.
It's not that expensive.
It's really not. And there's this spectrum, because it can either be run up a high price tag and you are, just behind the mic, or you could be doing a lot on the back end. So it's really, I'm always recommending and encouraging, especially business owners, to outsource as much of the tasks as possible, because I don't think it's worth your time to figure out how to do post-production on audio. Like I remember opening up GarageBand, trying to figure it out. It's not worth my time. That is not what I do in my business. So so I would say outsource it to an editor, someone that can put it through post-production and make it actually sound like a decent show, something that, the volume levels aren't all over the place. And then when there's some other stuff, marketing, it kind of depends. It's case by case for each business.
Well, let's look at the basics. I mean, you need a microphone.
Okay,
and you can get you need a quality microphone and gosh, I know there are resources available. I don't know if you've got this on your website, but tools like Podcasters Paradise, which is a paid community you can join that has an unbelievably detailed, easy to follow how-to way to launch a podcast. I'm sure there are others out there as well. Yeah,
there's a lot of schools and academies and places that will teach you everything. I think for this audience, I'd mostly say find people that do what you need them to do, rather than trying to learn it all yourself. Find that editor who you can pass the audio file off and they make it sound good. Find the person that can make your graphics and, have them design the graphics.
Well, I was talking about just the basic tools though. Microphone you should have.
Yes.
If you want a little small soundboard, perhaps mixing board that you run into. Is it
call recorder?
Yeah, call recorder. You're going to record via
Zoom.
Skype, Zoom. What are you going to use for that? So just some basic decisions. And you can start really simple. I mean, Skype is what I think still is predominantly used by a lot of
I think so.
podcasters.
Some people are moving to, there's this tool called Zencaster, which I've heard a lot of good things about. But when you start getting into stuff that's not norm, it's not the norm, it's a little complicated saying, okay, you have to go to this site, you have to download this. But if people have Skype, then it's just easy. Just launch Skype and I'll call you there. But when you have to tell guests, okay, go to this program, download this application, that makes it a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, and you want to keep it as simple as possible for your guests because
exactly.
what's their
Make it easy
incentive
for
to
your
invest
guests.
any time? Right. Okay, so and you'd spend $300 max even.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
to get started, it really doesn't cost that much.
It doesn't cost that much.
You could start really basic. I have a really nice high-end microphone right now, but I did not start that way. I started with a microphone that was a hand-me-down. It was a microphone my dad wasn't using, so I took it. And then, so you kind of evolve into the nicer equipment. So I don't think you need to start with the nicest stuff right at the beginning.
No, but you can get a good quality microphone for $79 on Amazon.
Yeah, I think the ATR 2100 is a great dynamic microphone.
Yep.
That's the one I tend to recommend, and because it blocks out, cars driving by, that's what a dynamic mic does, and that's like $60.
Yeah, that's my travel mic. So
yeah.
All right. So we've done branding. So now once you've recorded it, you use some outsourced resources you can find online very easily that do this, do the post-production for you. And so when you've got this file, you're going to post on your website. You have to promote it.
Yes, you do. You need to market it. And this is the hard part. It's really exciting to get the branding together and to start it and record it. And then you got to get it out there. So, there's first your email list. I think that is the primary place that you want to be promoting your content, is the people that have raised their hand and have already said, hey, I want to hear what you're doing. Like, I want to hear about what you're creating. You want to have a solid social media marketing strategy. I saw my downloads for my podcast really trended up when I started using a tool called Meet Edgar, because it's consistently posting old episodes. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times
we use that as well.
Oh, great. Yeah. I mean, when you just post the new ones, you're getting, downloads on the new episodes, but you have all this old evergreen content, so you don't just want it to sit in the archive. So, things like Meet Edgar are really helpful, and you can be creative with the different graphics and pulling out quotes from the episode and posting those. And then your relationship with your guest is huge, because guests aren't always going to be, promoting the show a lot, and I mean, that's okay. But I think the better your relationship is with the guest, the more they are going to want to promote it and get it out there. And so making it easy for them, making sure the experience goes really well, you treat them really well, it's a great interview, and then you're making it easy for them, giving them the graphics, the links, and all the stuff that makes it easy for them to promote it.
Exactly. And perhaps most importantly of all is, once you've recorded a podcast episode, you can easily get a transcript.
Yes.
And from the transcript, you can break that down into blog posts and tweets. And so you repurpose this content. So if perhaps you haven't been as consistent as you wanted to be on blogging, well, interestingly, your podcast, you could publish your podcast one day, and then the next day or 2 days later, you could have a blog based on that podcast, which serves the purpose of driving people back to listen to the podcast.
Exactly.
But it's also content you can share there. You can share on LinkedIn and all the other platforms. So really a multi-purpose tool for you that helps meet a lot of needs.
Yes. Yeah. You can repurpose content so many different ways with a podcast. I know people who have made whole ebooks with all, the transcripts of all the interviews. I'm working on my ebook right now, and I took at least one episode of my podcast. I had it transcribed and then kind of reworked it so it read well. And that, added a few pages to my ebook. So yeah, you can definitely repurpose the content. And that drives people back. And also having the content on hand, like if you're producing episodes on topics that are frequently asked about in your community. So if somebody in a Facebook group asks, hey, what do I need to know about starting a podcast network? I'm always linking to the episode of the Podcast Producers where we talk about networks. So I'm not just writing out my answer, but I'm saying, hey, listen to this podcast episode where we talked about this.
Exactly. Last segment of the show, everybody looks forward to this. I'm sure you have been as well. Is I pose questions for you. The first one is a hypothetical scenario. And in this scenario, you, Jessica, have just been hired as a VP of sales at a company whose sales have stalled out. So the CEO of this company, the board, really wants you to get things turned around in a hurry. So what 2 things could you do your first week on the job that could have the biggest impact?
I would pull up a list of all of the everyone who has purchased anything, any current or past customers or clients. Mm-hmm. And I would organize the list into, the most recent clients or customers, and also the, highest paying, who has paid the most money most recently. And just sort it that way. And I would look at what services we provide that each of these customers or clients have not purchased. So I could try to sell them other services. So, hey, you've been a member of you've been a client of this program, but we have this thing that I think you could really use. So I would essentially grow sales by trying to sell the services or products that the current clients aren't yet investing in.
Okay, good. All right. So now a little more rapid fire questions for you is when
Is that too long, Andy?
Pardon?
I said, was that too long of an answer for you?
No. That was meant to be long. These are the compact answers here. So when you, Jessica, are out selling the services of Interview Connections, what's your most powerful sales attribute?
I would say our most powerful sales attribute.
Your most powerful.
My most powerful sales attribute. I would say, gosh, I don't even. Can you give me an example?
Well, is it your confidence, your enthusiasm, your sincerity, your integrity?
I would say my experience.
Okay.
And the fact that I've been a practitioner and, I didn't just start doing this because it seemed like a good idea and everyone else is doing it. Like I've booked thousands of interviews and I have my own shows and I've done hundreds of videos. So I think people want to work with Interview Connections and want to work with me because they see that I've been doing it for a long time. And in the grand scheme of things, not a long time, but I've been doing a lot of it in a short amount of time.
In the lifespan of this iteration of podcasting, yes, that's a long time.
I've booked thousands of interviews, so I would say my experience.
Okay. So who's your role model in business?
My dad is my role model in business.
Okay. Yeah. And why?
Well, I have seen him go from literally nothing. I was, there as a kid watching him start and grow his business, hustling with side jobs to support the family. And I have witnessed from him how marketing really works and how consistency, being persistently consistent with videos and blogs and never just doing what looks easy. There's a lot of advice out there that says, hey, how can you get this done the easiest? But reality, growing a business is hard work. And so he doesn't shy away from that.
Okay. So one book you'd recommend that every aspiring podcaster should read?
Ooh, aspiring podcaster. Well, I would say for podcasting, I would recommend Jared Easley's book, Podcasting Good to Great. It is a book specifically about podcasting and how there's all the different opportunities for collaborating and building relationships in podcasting. So reading that book gave me a lot of ideas for podcasting.
Excellent. Okay, last question for you. What music's on your playlist these days?
Gosh, I listen to podcasts so much that my playlist, I use Spotify to listen, and I'm usually on the last one I like was an instrumental study playlist soundtrack, because if I'm listening to music, it's because I'm writing or working and I don't want any words. So that's so an instrumental study playlist.
Okay, like jazz.
Yeah, kind of some like electronic feelings. I'm not really a big jazz person. It's too all over the place for me. Like instrumental acoustic guitar, something like that.
All right. Well, good. Well, thanks for being on the show today. And how can people find out more about you and Interview Connections?
Well, thank you so much for having me. My main home base, all my content is at Jessica Rhodes, RHODES, jessicarhodes.biz. And if you want to learn how we can work with you for podcasting, interviewconnections.com.
Excellent. So good. Well, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
And remember, friends, make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And one easy way to do that is to make this podcast accelerate a part of your daily routine, whether you listen in the car, in the gym, or make it part of your morning sales meeting. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Jessica Rhodes, who shared her expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.
Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.